I want you to take a second and just think back to the specific feeling of having a crisp $10 bill in your wallet.
Oh, yeah. I remember that feeling well.
Right, because maybe 10 or, I don't know, 15 or 20 years ago, that single piece of paper felt like an absolute guarantee.
It really did. It was is basically a ticket to a guaranteed meal.
Exactly. You could pull into almost any drive-through in the country and order 2 full combo meals. And I mean 2 burgers, 2 large fries, 2 heavy sodas.
Mm-hmm.
You'd hand over that $10 bill, and you would fully expect the cashier to hand you coins back and change.
Yeah. Which is just wild to think about now.
It is. Because it was more than just a transaction.
Yeah.
It was this reliable societal baseline. It was the great American promise of cheap, accessible convenience.
Right. And that baseline, I mean, it was a fundamental part of the culture, particularly for working class and middle class families.
Absolutely.
The appeal of fast food wasn't ever that it was the highest quality meal you could buy. The appeal was the absolute predictability of the pricing.
You knew exactly what you were getting into.
Exactly. You didn't even need to look at the menu board.
Yeah.
Whether you were, say, a retiree on a fixed income grabbing breakfast, or maybe a parent feeding a minivan full of kids after soccer practice, you had this ingrained psychological anchor of what that convenience was supposed to cost.
Yeah, and I really want to contrast that deeply ingrained memory with the reality you face pulling up to that exact same speaker box today.
It's a completely different world.
It really is. The paradigm hasn't just shifted, it has completely fractured. I mean, a simple, bare-bones fast food breakfast for 2 people, or just a standard combo meal for yourself, can now effortlessly break a $20 bill.
Oh, easily.
So the fundamental equation of fast food, trading high quality for cheap convenience, it's been turned completely upside down. The convenience is mostly still there, but the affordability has just vanished.
Right.
So the central question for us today is, how exactly did the ultimate American symbol of democratic, cheap dining become essentially a luxury good?
Well, answering that requires looking far beyond the physical menu board.
Right.
Because the current environment, it's the result of a highly complex, decades-long collision of macroeconomic forces. We're looking at a landscape that's been permanently altered by severe supply chain shocks, unprecedented shifts in the labor market, targeted algorithmic pricing, and honestly, some deeply aggressive corporate profit strategies that were implemented under the cover of broader national inflation.
Yeah, and that's exactly what our mission is for this deep dive. We're going to isolate and examine those invisible economic gears.
Right.
We're going to completely deconstruct the fast food affordability crisis. And we've gathered a massive stack of sources to do this. We're pulling from on-the-ground consumer reports on YouTube, economic data from CBS News, franchise industry publications.
Yeah, we have some really fascinating data to go through.
We do, including a highly granular UC Berkeley study on minimum wage impacts and even a U.S. Senate inquiry into corporate pricing. We are going way beyond the immediate sticker shock to understand the mechanics of how and why everyday Americans, particularly those on fixed budgets who historically relied on this industry, are being quietly priced out of the drive-thru. But let's start with the immediate physical reality of what consumers are experiencing right now at the counter. Because the frustration out there is just palpable.
It really is. I mean, the consumer sentiment data we're reviewing, it paints a picture of profound alienation.
Alienation's a good word for it.
Yeah, because we're seeing this phenomenon where the psychological thresholds of consumers are just being crossed on a daily basis.
Right.
The on-the-ground reports, which are documented heavily through, actual receipts and consumer videos, they reveal an environment where everyday items have detached entirely from their historical value markers.
And the anecdotes are genuinely stunning when you look at the raw numbers. Like, one consumer report documented a visit to Wendy's for a standard breakfast with a friend, and the final total at the window, $50.
Wow. $50 for a fast food breakfast.
Yeah, and the customer highlighted that their single chicken biscuit sandwich, and I mean just the sandwich, no hash browns, no drink, was $7.
That's just incredible.
And it's everywhere. At McDonald's, a medium iced coffee is frequently sitting at $3.50. And maybe the most heavily marketed value promotion in modern fast food history, the Subway $5 footlong. That is completely extinct.
Right, and the erosion of those staple value markers is highly significant, especially from a behavioral economic standpoint.
How so?
Well, anchors like the $5 footlong or the dollar menu, They trained consumers over decades to expect a specific volume of food for a specific unit of currency.
Right, you get used to what a dollar buys you.
Exactly. So when those anchors are suddenly removed, the consumer experiences acute disorientation and a lot of frustration.
Yeah, I feel that.
But the thing is, outright price hikes are actually only one half of the strategy these companies are currently deploying.
Right, there's a whole other side to this.
Yeah, the other half is a quieter, much more insidious mathematical adjustment known as shrinkflation.
Shrinkflation.
Yeah,
Yeah, I want to spend some time on this because this concept feels deeply personal to the consumer.
it definitely does.
This isn't just a number changing on a digital screen. It's a physical alteration of the product you're actually holding in your hand. Our sources are full of consumers literally taking out tape measures, weighing their food on kitchen scales, and documenting these changes.
And they aren't crazy for doing it because the franchise industry data fully corroborates what those consumers are documenting.
Really, they openly talk about it.
Oh, yeah. Shrinkflation is a highly calibrated, deliberate margin protection strategy.
Okay, break that down for me. How does the mechanic actually work behind the scenes?
The mechanics are pretty straightforward. A corporation is facing rising production costs, right? Whether that's the cost of beef, wheat, or even just the cardboard packaging.
Everything costs more.
Exactly. However, their internal financial modeling shows that consumers are currently highly inelastic regarding price.
Meaning they won't accept another hike?
Right. Meaning, if they raise the price of a hamburger by another $2, foot traffic will demonstrably collapse. People will just stop coming.
Yeah, they'll hit their breaking point.
So to avoid triggering that fatal sticker shock, the company keeps the retail price identical. Or maybe they implement a microscopic increase. But while they do that, they quietly reduce the volume, the weight, or the physical quantity of the food provided.
So you're literally paying the exact same amount of money to consume fewer calories.
Exactly.
And because fast food is such a visual, tactile experience,
Yeah,
you eat it with your hands, the consumer notices immediately.
they do. They feel it.
The examples from the consumer reports are just varied across the entire industry. Like, Domino's Pizza altered a heavily promoted week-long carry-out wing deal. The price was pushed from $5.99 to $6.99, which is a price hike, sure.
Right.
But simultaneously, they reduced the physical number of wings in the box from 10 down to 8.
Wow. So hitting them from both sides.
Exactly. And customers also noted the wings themselves appeared to be smaller cuts of meat.
Yeah, and we see identical strategies documented across all the major players. Like McDonald's Filet-O-Fish sandwiches are frequently cited in consumer data as resembling sliders compared to their historical footprint.
I've seen those pictures. They look tiny.
They do, and the dimensions of burger patties across multiple chains are visibly thinner. Burger King has been cited for reducing the count in their chicken nugget packaging.
Right, from 10 to 8, I think.
Yeah, and Popeyes actually reduced the physical volume of their side dishes.
Oh, really? How did they do that?
They started utilizing shallower containers for items like mashed potatoes and macaroni and cheese. So it looks the same from the top, but it masks the reduction in total ounces.
The masking aspect is what really fascinates me. It's not just making the food smaller, it's redesigning the geometry of the packaging, so the smaller food doesn't look sad and empty in the box.
Exactly. It's an illusion.
One of the most striking examples from the sources involved a customer literally locking a tape measure at 6 inches and holding it up to a Subway 6-inch sandwich.
Oh, I saw that one.
And the bread only measured 5 inches. The customer was paying the 6-inch premium for 5 inches of actual product.
Yeah, it's wild.
Even a brand like Chipotle, which, they built their entire market identity on the visual spectacle of massive overflowing burritos.
Right, the giant scoop of meat.
Exactly. Even they have faced massive pushback over shrinking protein scoops, which actually forced their executive team to publicly address the portion sizes.
Well, the corporate calculation behind shrinkflation is a really delicate balancing act involving brand equity. Because for a business, reducing a portion size by just a fraction of an ounce, when spread across 10 million transactions a day, that yields massive savings on the prime cost ledger.
Right. It adds up fast.
It really does. It is a highly effective way to manage inflation and supply chain volatility on their end. But the enormous risk is the erosion of consumer trust.
Right.
Fast food relies heavily on habit and brand loyalty. When a customer feels actively deceived by the literal geometry of the product, that loyalty evaporates much faster than it does from a transparent, honest price increase.
I can definitely see that. But I I do have to push back slightly on the nostalgia element here.
Okay, sure.
Because when I read these reports from people in their 50s and 60s saying, I know what a Big Mac looked like in 1995, and this isn't it, a part of me wonders about the unreliability of human memory.
That's a fair point.
We all know that phenomenon where your childhood home feels incredibly small when you walk into it as an adult.
Right, the perspective shifts.
Exactly. So is there a chance that we are just romanticizing the portions of the past? Like, are these reductions truly objective and measurable? Or is there a psychological bias at play?
Well, memory bias is a real phenomenon, absolutely. But the franchise and supply chain data we reviewed confirms this is a physical reality, not a trick of nostalgia.
Really? So it is objective.
Completely objective. Industry publications discuss these reductions openly. They call it margin engineering.
Margin engineering.
Yes. These specifications for the physical dimensions of a bun, the exact diameter of a frozen patty, and the cubic volume of a fry carton, those are negotiated with suppliers down to the absolute millimeter.
Wow, down to the millimeter.
Exactly. So when Waffle House waffles become thinner, or when a KFC chicken patty no longer reaches the perimeter of the bun, those aren't accidents. Those are the results of deliberate specification changes executed in corporate boardrooms to offset rising prime costs. It is entirely measurable.
Okay, so the consumer is basically trapped in a vice. The price of the meal is surging upward, while the physical volume of the meal is shrinking downward.
Right. You're getting squeezed on both ends.
But to truly understand why the corporations are engineering these margins so aggressively, we have to look past the frustration at the drive-through window and examine the macroeconomic data.
We do.
Because the incredible shrinking burger is ultimately just a symptom of a much larger systemic economic shift.
Yeah, and looking at the macro level, the most critical data point we have is the divergence between two specific economic metrics:
What are they?
food away from home inflation and food at home inflation.
Okay, so restaurants versus groceries.
Exactly. Historically, these two indices tracked relatively closely together. If groceries got more expensive, so did restaurants, but at a similar rate.
Makes sense.
But the recent data shows a severe decoupling.
And the math here is pretty brutal for the restaurant industry. The data indicates that food away from home inflation, which encompasses everything from fine dining down to the drive-through window, is sitting at approximately 3.9% year over year. Meanwhile, grocery inflation, or food at home, has cooled significantly, sitting at roughly 2.2%.
And the real-world translation of that percentage gap is a fundamental disruption in American dining habits.
Because it shifts the math for the consumer.
Entirely. It is currently demonstrably mathematically cheaper to purchase raw ingredients at a grocery store and prepare a meal in your own kitchen than it is to purchase a fast food combo meal.
Which is wild, because for generations, fast food successfully competed directly with the grocery store on raw price.
Exactly. A middle-class family could justify the drive-through because the cost difference between buying the burgers and making them at home was completely negligible when you factored in the time saved.
Right, the convenience was basically free?
But that era has ended. The cost disparity between the grocery store and the drive-through has simply become too vast to ignore.
So let's break down the mechanics of why that disparity actually exists. Our sources point heavily to severe commodity and supply chain pressures, right?
Yes, massively.
Take the price of beef, for example. The benchmark price for beef has surged, hitting an astonishing $11.49 per pound in recent data.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't just a byproduct of general monetary inflation like printing money. This is driven by physical environmental reality.
It is. It's a supply issue.
Right. The United States is currently experiencing the smallest national cattle herd in decades. Years of severe, sustained droughts across major agricultural zones basically forced ranchers to cull their herds early. They literally could not afford the water or the feed required to maintain them.
Yeah, and the critical thing to understand there is that rebuilding a cattle herd is not like ramping up production on an auto assembly line.
Right. You can't just flip a switch and make more cows.
Exactly. It is constrained by biology. It takes years to breed, raise, and process new livestock.
Wow.
So when you drastically contract the supply of a foundational ingredient like beef, the baseline acquisition cost for every single restaurant chain skyrockets.
Right. And it's not just domestic issues, is it?
No, because the supply chain is deeply interconnected globally. Tariffs on imported agricultural goods, whether that is specific cuts of imported beef used for blending or vital cooking ingredients like palm oil, they add significant friction and cost to the procurement process. The The food inflation for these operators recently peaked at over 10%.
Okay, so the input costs for the raw materials are devastating.
Mm-hmm.
But acquiring the food is really only one side of the operational ledger.
It's true.
The other massive factor, and arguably the most structurally transformative one, is the explosion in labor costs.
Absolutely.
Because if we look at the historical restaurant model, labor was a relatively predictable, manageable line item. It typically consumed about 30 to 35% of a restaurant's total revenue.
Right. And that historical 30 to 35% target, that was essentially the golden rule of restaurant management. You balanced your labor cost with your food costs to maintain your prime margin.
Right, keep it in that window.
But today, due to severe labor shortages post-pandemic, massive cost of living increases across the entire country, and just intense wage competition between industries, that labor line item is frequently pushing closer to 40% of revenue for many operators.
And this brings us to a data point from a lending tree study that I think just perfectly encapsulates the absurdity of the current economic environment.
Oh, this is a striking one.
It's what I call the fast food workers paradox. A typical fast food combo meal in the United States now carries an average cost of $11.56.
Mm-hmm.
And in higher cost urban markets, that same basic meal is approaching $14.
Right. And mapping that rising retail cost against the average hourly wage of the very workers preparing the food reveals a really startling economic reality.
It does. It currently requires the average U.S. fast food worker 46 minutes of physical labor just to earn enough gross income to afford a single basic combo meal from the industry they actually work in.
46.
46 minutes of standing on your feet for one burger, fries, and a drink. And in a market like San Francisco, it takes a fast food worker nearly 37 minutes of labor to buy that combo meal.
Wow.
To put that in perspective for you, the average American worker in other economic sectors only has to work about 16 minutes to afford that exact same meal.
It is just a stark illustration of the affordability crisis.
Yeah.
The individuals tasked with providing the convenience of affordable food have been entirely priced out of consuming it themselves.
It really makes me think about the classic American industrial ideal. You know, Henry Ford wanting to pay his assembly line workers enough so they could actually afford to buy the Model T they were building.
Great, the foundation of the middle class.
Exactly. But here we are looking at the exact inverse of that. The worker cannot afford the product they are assembling. And we aren't talking about a luxury vehicle. We are talking about a basic cheeseburger.
Yeah.
When the baseline standard of convenience becomes financially inaccessible to the people providing the labor, the entire economic model begins to look fundamentally broken.
It does. And the friction between rising labor costs and menu prices is arguably the central battleground of the industry right now.
Because the operators blame the wages.
Exactly. If operators claim that labor costs are the primary driver forcing prices up to the point where even workers can't afford the food, it raises an incredibly important policy question.
What's that?
Well, what actually happens to the consumer when the government forcefully intervenes and mandates a significantly higher wage floor for those workers?
Right. And we don't have to rely on abstract economic theories to answer that because we have a massive real-world experiment that just took place.
Yes, we do.
Let's look closely at the state of California. In April 2024, California implemented a highly discussed minimum wage policy. And we have a granular, extremely detailed working paper from UC Berkeley that analyzed the immediate economic fallout of this legislation.
And we're approaching this strictly as an objective economic case study, looking just at the data.
Absolutely, just the numbers.
The parameters of the law were unique. California did not raise the minimum wage for everyone. They mandated a $20 hourly wage floor specifically targeted at workers in large fast food chains.
And how do they define large?
They defined it as brands possessing at least 60 locations nationwide.
Okay, so this was laser-focused on the mega corporations.
Yeah.
McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, Taco Bell.
Exactly. Not the mom-and-pop diners.
Right. And at the time of implementation, that $20 standard was one of the highest minimum wages on the planet. It represented roughly 69% of the state's median full-time wage.
Mm-hmm.
Before the law took effect, the business press and industry lobbyists were issuing some pretty catastrophic predictions.
Oh, we're dire.
The narrative was that a mandated wage hike of this magnitude would trigger massive, widespread job cuts, a severe reduction in operating hours, and double-digit price hikes at the menu board. The popular warning you heard everywhere was that a standard hamburger would suddenly cost $20.
Right, but those projections were based on traditional linear economic modeling.
Meaning what?
meaning the assumption that increased costs must be offset immediately by equivalent price hikes or labor reductions,
Hmm.
a one-to-one ratio.
Right.
However, the methodology the UC Berkeley researchers utilized to track the actual fallout was incredibly sophisticated. They bypassed broad, easily manipulated state averages.
What did they look at instead?
They utilized Glassdoor job postings to monitor real-time wage offerings. They accessed Square payroll data to analyze small business impact.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah, and they utilized Advan mobility data, which tracks aggregated, anonymized cell phone foot traffic to precisely measure employment levels and customer volume at specific locations.
Wow, so tracking actual physical phones moving in and out of the stores.
Exactly. Furthermore, they deployed web scraping algorithms across the digital menus of over 2,000 restaurants to track price changes down to the individual cent.
It is a breathtakingly precise data set. So let's look at the actual mechanics of what happened after the law passed. Did wages go up? Yes, definitively. The data indicates that average weekly wages for the fast food workers covered by the law increased by approximately 11%.
Right.
So the policy achieved its primary goal of elevating worker income. But the truly shocking data point concerns the doom and gloom predictions regarding employment.
This is the fascinating part.
According to the foot traffic and payroll data, employment did not drop.
Right.
There was no statistically significant negative employment effect. The massive chains did not execute mass layoffs.
The employment stability is fascinating, but the impact on pricing is perhaps the most crucial finding for the consumer.
Let's talk about the prices.
When the researchers isolated California's large fast food chains and compared their menu prices to control states, and even to smaller uncovered restaurants within California, the data showed that prices only rose by about 1.5% as a direct result of the wage mandate.
Wait, 1.5%?
That's it, 1.5%.
To translate that into the real world for consumers standing at the register, a 1.5% increase on a $4 hamburger is roughly 6 cents.
Exactly. 6
A
cents.
massive historic wage hike resulted in a 6-cent price increase.
Yeah, and this data fundamentally shatters the traditional narrative that wage increases must correspond one-to-one with retail price increases.
So how is that possible?
Well, to comprehend why the price impact was so microscopic, we have to examine the underlying economic mechanics, specifically a concept known as price pass-through.
Price pass-through.
Yes. This metric represents the exact percentage of new operational costs that an employer successfully passes on to the consumer in the form of higher retail prices.
And the UC Berkeley study calculated that the pass-through in this specific scenario was only about 50%, right?
Exactly.
So the corporations only passed half of the new labor cost onto the customer. They actively chose to absorb the other half themselves.
They did. And the decision to absorb that cost was driven by two powerful market forces: highly inelastic consumer demand and what labor economists call monopsony power.
Let's unpack monopsony power, because it's a term that gets thrown around in academic circles but rarely explained in plain English.
It's a vital concept here.
We all know what a monopoly is, right? One seller dominating the market, allowing them to dictate the price of a good. Monopsony is the exact inverse of that.
Right.
It's a market condition where there is one dominant buyer and many sellers. And in the labor market, the commodity being sold is human labor.
Exactly.
Imagine a rural town with only one large hospital. That hospital possesses immense monopsony power over the local nurses. If a nurse wants to work in their field, they basically have no choice but to accept whatever wage the hospital offers, because there is no competing employer to drive the wage up.
Perfect analogy. And in the context of the fast food industry, massive mega chains essentially operate as an oligopsony in many regional labor markets.
Because there's only a few massive buyers of that specific type of labor.
Exactly. Because of their sheer scale, they have historically possessed the market leverage to dictate wages, keeping them artificially suppressed below what a perfectly competitive free market would naturally demand.
Right.
So when the California legislation forcefully removed that leverage by mandating a wage floor, these mega chains faced a critical strategic decision.
What are their options?
Well, they could try to maintain their historical profit margins by passing 100% of the new cost to the consumer, or they could absorb the cost.
And they chose to absorb it because they knew the consumer was already at the absolute breaking point.
Precisely.
If a McDonald's in California suddenly raised menu prices by 15% overnight to cover the wage hike, foot traffic wouldn't just slow down. it would crater.
Right. The consumer would abandon the drive-through entirely and just go to the grocery store.
So the megachains realized that protecting their massive volume of daily transactions was more important than protecting their per-item profit margin. They essentially ate the cost to keep the doors open.
They executed a deliberate margin compression. They adjusted their corporate expectations for profitability in that specific market rather than slashing employment or risking consumer revolt through massive price hikes.
Okay, but this data point creates a massive logical contradiction that we absolutely need to address.
What's that?
I am looking at this UC Berkeley study. It mathematically proves that multi-billion-dollar fast food chains possess the financial capacity to absorb massive, historic labor cost increases while only raising the price of a burger by 6 cents.
Right.
If they are capable of absorbing labor costs so easily in California, why have national fast food prices exploded across the entire country over the last 5 years?
That is the million-dollar question.
If wages aren't the primary driver of these massive price hikes, what is?
Well, that contradiction is the exact pivot point that takes us away from the local franchise operator and directly into the corporate boardrooms on Wall Street.
Because the numbers don't add up otherwise.
Exactly. If supply chain shocks and labor mandates do not fully account for the sheer velocity of the price spikes we've witnessed nationally, we must examine the corporate ledgers themselves.
Right.
Which brings us to a highly revealing recent inquiry conducted by the United States Senate.
Yes. We're going to examine the data presented in a joint letter drafted by Senators Elizabeth Warren, Bob Casey, and Ron Wyden, which was sent directly to the CEO of McDonald's in late 2024.
And to be completely transparent, we are analyzing this inquiry strictly as a documentary source of financial data.
Exactly. We are taking no political sides here. We are simply unpacking the audited financial numbers and the market trends they cite.
Right. Because focusing strictly on the raw financial data is crucial, as the numbers presented in the inquiry present a stark contrast to the industry narrative of corporations merely trying to survive the pressures of inflation.
So let's establish the baseline long-term price data. Reports from CBS News and Finance Buzz analyzing national averages demonstrate that fast food menu prices have surged anywhere from 39% to 100% over the last 10 years.
The Senate inquiry specifically highlights that McDonald's menu prices increased by an aggressive 40% just within the 5-year window between 2019 and 2024. 40% in 5 years.
Yeah. Specific, highly popular value items, such as the McDouble, have seen their prices more than double since 2014.
And when analyzing price increases, context is everything. You have to compare those specific menu price hikes against the broader consumer price index, or CPI, which tracks general economy-wide inflation.
Right, to see if they're just keeping pace.
Exactly. But the CPI increased by approximately 20% since 2020. Therefore, fast food prices have, in numerous instances, accelerated at roughly double the rate of standard national inflation.
Double the rate. And for years, the corporate explanation for this acceleration rested entirely on those input costs we discussed earlier, the price of beef and the cost of labor.
Right.
But the Senate inquiry cross-referenced menu prices with McDonald's own publicly filed financial reports, revealing a massive glaring discrepancy.
This is where the math gets really interesting.
According to the filings cited in the letter, McDonald's operating expenses did indeed rise by 16.5% from 2020 to 2023. That is a real, verifiable increase in the cost of doing business.
Yes.
But over that exact same 3-year period, McDonald's net profit margins expanded from 26% to 32%.
The expansion of margin during a period of high inflation is the critical detail here. Furthermore, their operating profit margin reached an astonishing 52% in 2023.
52%.
Yes. Within the landscape of the 10 largest publicly traded fast food conglomerates, that 52% operating margin is the highest recorded.
Operating expenses went up 16.5%. That makes sense, given the supply chain issues. But the most staggering number in the entire inquiry is this. McDonald's net annual income rose by 79%, reaching nearly $8.5 billion in 2023.
It's hard to even conceptualize that number.
Let me repeat that for everyone listening. Costs went up 16.5%, but net income pure profit went up 79%.
The mechanism driving that discrepancy is the concept of the markup.
Explain the markup.
A markup is simply the mathematical difference between the final retail price the consumer pays and the actual cost of production.
Okay.
The Senate inquiry cites economic analyses suggesting that the markups applied by these corporations in 2023 reached historically unprecedented levels. This data suggests a coordinated corporate strategy that utilized the chaotic environment of broad economic inflation to aggressively push discretionary price hikes.
Think about the psychology of that moment. Everyone in the country knew inflation was rampant.
Oh, yeah.
Gas prices were up, grocery bills were up, it was on the news every night. The fast food corporations realized they had perfect narrative cover.
Exactly.
If they raised the price of a combo meal by $2, the consumer would just sigh and blame inflation.
Right, they wouldn't blame the restaurant.
But the financial ledgers proved they weren't just raising prices to cover the increased cost of the beef and the labor. They were raising prices to aggressively expand their profit margins under the camouflage of a national crisis.
It is a textbook application of testing demand elasticity.
Testing the limits.
Exactly. The strategy is to systematically elevate the price point quarter after quarter, continually testing the consumer to see how much pain they will tolerate before fundamentally altering their behavior.
And for a while, it worked.
It did. For several years, consumers, particularly middle-class families with limited time, tolerated the pain. They complained, sure, but they continued to enter the drive-thru.
Right.
That sustained, inelastic demand is what generated those record-breaking $8.5 billion profits. But consumer elasticity is not infinite. Eventually, the strategy finds the ceiling. You test the limits of what a retiree or a working parent will endure until the entire system fractures.
And the frustration was compounded by how these corporations chose to utilize those massive windfalls. They didn't just stockpile the $8.5 billion in a vault.
No, they didn't.
The Senate inquiry highlights a massive deployment of capital that feels particularly grating to a consumer struggling to afford a basic meal. According to the financial data, McDonald's allocated over $7 billion towards stock buybacks since 2022.
And to understand why that figure is so controversial, we really must define the mechanics of a stock buyback.
Yeah, please do.
A buyback occurs when a publicly traded company utilizes its excess cash reserves to purchase its own shares directly from the open market.
Okay.
By removing those shares from circulation, the company mathematically reduces the overall supply of available stock. Basic supply and demand dictates that reducing the supply artificially inflates the financial value of the remaining shares.
So who actually benefits from that?
The primary beneficiaries of this action are the existing shareholders and the corporate executives whose compensation packages are heavily tied to stock performance.
Right.
It does not improve the food, it does not raise worker pay, and it certainly does not lower prices.
So the senators utilize this exact data to pose a very pointed structural question. If a corporation possesses $7 billion in excess liquidity to artificially inflate its stock price,
Right.
could that massive pool of capital have been deployed differently? Could it have been utilized to absorb those supply chain shocks, lower menu prices for the everyday consumer, or significantly invest in the workforce, all without jeopardizing the fundamental financial stability of the company?
It ultimately becomes a question of corporate priorities and fiduciary duty versus consumer loyalty.
Yeah.
And the consumer watching the price of a McDouble double over a decade while the corporation executes multi-billion-dollar stock buybacks, they finally reached their absolute breaking point.
They snapped.
They did. The behavioral shift the corporations feared finally materialized. Everyday Americans, specifically those managing fixed retirement budgets or middle-class families trying to stretch a paycheck, looked at a $20 receipt for a fast food lunch and made a definitive choice to walk away.
The consumer revolt is real, and it has thrown the entire fast food industry into a state of visible panic.
Complete panic.
We are currently witnessing the profound power of boycotting with your wallet. The data is undeniable. McDonald's, a corporate juggernaut that almost never experiences backward momentum in revenue, reported a highly unusual 3.6% drop in sales in recent quarterly data. The situation was severe enough that the CEO had to address investors on an earnings call, admitting that heightened anxiety regarding the economy was weighing heavily on lower and middle-income Americans.
Yeah, and that is corporate speak for, we push the price too high and they abandon us.
Exactly. And the consumer pushback manifested even more dramatically with Panera Bread.
Oh, the Panera situation is fascinating.
Panera had engaged in some of the most aggressive margin engineering tactics in the industry. They implemented severe shrinkflation, reduced portion sizes, and initiated aggressive labor cuts.
Right, which notably included eliminating the in-house bakers who were central to the brand's artisan identity.
Right, the smell of fresh bread was gone.
Yes. And the consumer reaction was immediate and fierce. Sales and foot traffic sank so rapidly that Panera's executive team was forced to execute a panicked 180-degree operational
They
turn.
completely reversed course.
They did. They publicly issued statements promising to rehire staff, improve ingredient quality, and reinstate larger portion sizes. It stands as a direct, measurable victory for consumer elasticity snapping back.
It's a rare moment where the everyday consumer actually forced a massive corporation to blink.
Yeah,
But the broader industry is terrified.
they are.
They realize they have completely alienated their core demographic. They lost the 50 to 65 plus consumer who used to stop in for a coffee and a sandwich. They lost the lower income diners, and they are now desperately scrambling to win them back.
Right.
And this scramble has ignited a chaotic period that industry analysts have dubbed the value wars.
The value wars represent a frantic, industry-wide attempt to reclaim the psychological mantle of affordability.
Because if they lose that,
Because if fast food loses its affordability, it loses its sole competitive advantage. If a fast food combo costs $15, the consumer will simply choose to eat at a casual, sit-down dining chain like Chili's or Applebee's.
right, where you can actually sit down and be served.
Exactly. Those chains have aggressively introduced $10.99 plated meal deals that offer vastly superior perceived value, atmosphere, and service compared to a drive-through window.
So to fight this war, the fast food chains are resurrecting the ghost of the value menu, but they're wrapping it in new marketing terminology.
Yes, they are.
Like McDonald's launched a highly publicized $5 meal deal which includes a McDouble or a McChicken, a small fry, chicken nuggets, and a drink.
Mm-hmm.
And originally, this was slated as a brief one-month promotion. However, the data showed it was so incredibly effective at driving foot traffic back to the restaurants that 80% of independent franchisees voted to extend the promotion through the end of the year.
And the rest of the industry was forced to respond immediately to maintain their market share.
Everyone jumped in.
Burger King launched a competing $5 Your Way meal. Taco Bell introduced a $7 Lux Cravings box, bundling a chalupa, a burrito, a taco, and chips, a combination of items that would historically cost well over $15 if purchased individually.
Wow.
And Sonic took a completely different, highly aggressive structural approach. Rather than offering a limited-time promotional bundle, they permanently altered their menu architecture by launching the $1.99 Fun 99 menu, offering substantial items like quarter-pound double cheeseburgers for $2.
Okay, this brings up a massive logical disconnect for me.
What is it?
We just spent an extensive amount of time outlining how severe the prime costs are. We discussed beef hitting $11 a pound and labor consuming 40% of revenue.
Right?
If the baseline cost of operating the restaurant is that phenomenally high, how can they suddenly afford to sell a massive box of food for $5 or $7? Are they actively losing money on every single transaction just to get people in the door?
Well, the strategic logic underpinning the value wars relies heavily on the economic concept of the loss leader.
A loss leader.
Oh.
Okay.
Although corporate executives will frequently insist they are not technically losing money on these transactions, the reality is that the profit margins on these specific, highly marketed value meals are razor thin. Industry analysts estimate the yield margins on these promotional bundles sit somewhere between 1% and 5%.
A 1 to 5% margin on a $5 item means they're making pennies. It's essentially a break-even transaction.
That is the precise intention. The primary objective is not to generate substantial net profit from the $5 meal itself. The strategic goal is customer acquisition.
Just get them in the lane.
Exactly. They are attempting to capture foot traffic and volume. The economic model banks entirely on the add-on. The algorithm assumes that once a customer is physically present in the drive-through lane or standing at the register, a significant percentage will purchase a high-margin item to accompany the value meal. A large premium soda, a specialty dessert, or perhaps the second person in the vehicle will order a full-priced, high-margin combo meal. They are willingly sacrificing the margin on the promotional item to stimulate overall volume.
But there is a massive, highly controversial caveat to this entire strategy. And this is where we uncover the hidden psychological costs of modern fast food discounts.
Yes, this is crucial.
It is a dynamic that is proving to be profoundly alienating, particularly for older demographics who value traditional commerce. I refer to it as the app trap.
The app trap is really the defining structural feature of the modern value economy.
It is.
The most aggressive deals, the deepest discounts, and the only truly affordable options are no longer advertised on the physical, illuminated menu boards above the cash register.
They're hidden.
They have been removed from the physical realm entirely and gated behind proprietary smartphone applications.
And the friction this causes is immense. Let's look at Subway's attempt to resurrect their most famous promotion. They finally brought back a variation of the foot-long deal, a $6.99 footlong. However, there was a massive non-negotiable string attached to the promotion. The consumer could only access that $6.99 price point if they executed the order digitally, either through the website or the Subway smartphone app.
Right.
If a customer walked physically into the store, stood at the counter, looked the employee in the eye, and verbally ordered the exact same sandwich, they were charged the full inflated retail price.
It's wild.
And Wendy's utilizes the exact same gatekeeping strategy. They heavily market a $5 biggie bag. But if you want the free Frosty that makes the bundle a true value, you are forced to process the transaction through their app.
And the corporations implement this digital gatekeeping for highly specific, highly lucrative reasons.
What?
A proprietary app provides the corporation with a stream of invaluable, monetizable consumer data. It meticulously tracks individual purchasing habits. It allows for hyper-targeted push marketing, and it encourages the accumulation of digital loyalty points, which psychologically binds the consumer to the brand.
Wow, so they're getting a lot out of it.
Oh, absolutely. And most crucially, from an operational standpoint, it entirely eliminates the labor cost of the transaction. The customer is actively performing the labor of the cashier.
I never thought of it that way. You become the employee.
Exactly. By forcing consumers to adopt the app in exchange for affordability, the corporation is actively monetizing the consumer's personal data and physical labor to subsidize the razor-thin margin of the discounted food.
I really want to look at this from the perspective of the everyday consumer, specifically someone in that 50 to 65 plus demographic who might not want another app tracking their location on their phone.
That's a huge segment of the population.
It is. Are we fundamentally transitioning into a two-tiered economy where an individual is effectively penalized, forced to pay a higher, unadvertised premium simply for engaging in traditional commerce? Like, are you being taxed for walking up to a cash register and using cash instead of a smartphone?
From the perspective of consumers who are less technologically integrated or individuals who place a high premium on digital privacy, it functions exactly like a penalty. Consumer Reports describe a deep resentment over essentially paying extra for the privilege of human assistance. The economic reality is that if a consumer refuses to utilize the digital application, they are effectively subsidizing the discounts of the consumers who do.
It's exhausting. And the exhaustion consumers feel regarding this digital friction is only going to intensify because the technology driving the app trap allows for even more aggressive algorithmic pricing strategies.
Right.
We saw a terrifying glimpse of this future recently with Wendy's disastrous flirtation with dynamic pricing.
Oh, the dynamic pricing incident, often referred to as surge pricing. That was a highly revealing moment for the industry.
Walk us through what happened there.
Well, Wendy's executives held an earnings call where they openly discussed investing tens of millions of dollars into digital infrastructure, specifically digital menu boards.
Okay.
And these boards would possess the capability to fluidly alter menu prices throughout the day based on real-time algorithmic demand. The underlying concept is identical to how rideshare companies like Uber charge a massive premium during a rainstorm or after a major concert.
And the public reaction to that announcement was immediate and furious.
Oh.
The concept that a standard cheeseburger might cost $6 at 11:00 a.m., but algorithmically surged to $9 at 12:30 p.m. simply because the lunch rush began, struck consumers as deeply dystopian.
It really crossed the line for people.
The backlash was so universally severe that Wendy's corporate communications team had to execute an immediate, humiliating backtrack. They issued statements clarifying they would not raise prices during peak hours.
Right, they had to walk it back entirely.
But the critical takeaway isn't the backtrack, it's the intent.
Exactly.
The fact that the physical and digital infrastructure is actively being built and funded to allow for that kind of fluid algorithmic pricing, that reveals the ultimate mindset of the industry.
It signals a fundamental paradigm shift away from the concept of static, predictable value, moving toward an environment of dynamic, highly conditional value. Purchasing fast food is no longer a simple, transparent financial transaction. It is rapidly evolving into a complex algorithmic exchange involving data harvesting, behavioral timing, and forced digital engagement.
Which really brings us to the final assessment of our journey today. We have examined the physical reality of the shrinking burger patty, we've broken down the macroeconomic pressures of the cattle supply and labor mandates, and we've analyzed the raw data of corporate ledgers and Wall Street buybacks.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. And the overarching conclusion is unavoidable. Fast food is no longer the default democratic cheap option in American culture.
The landscape has permanently and fundamentally changed.
Yeah.
When you aggregate the physical reality of shrinkflation, the immense digital friction of app-gated menus, and the economic reality of unprecedented corporate profit-taking executed during a period of national inflation, the baseline cost of convenience has reached an absolute zenith.
And looking forward, the structural implications for the industry itself are massive.
They are.
The financial data we reviewed points directly toward a looming aggressive wave of mergers and acquisitions, consolidation.
Because these desperate value wars running on 1% profit margins, a multinational megacorporation like McDonald's possesses the sheer scale and capital to survive that war of attrition.
Right, they can afford the loss leader.
Exactly. But the smaller regional chains and independent franchise operators, they do not possess the capital reserves to sustain those low margins. They will be slowly starved out by the economics of the value wars and inevitably swallowed up by the massive conglomerates.
Yeah, that's the likely outcome.
This will lead to massive industry consolidation and ultimately significantly less market competition in the future.
And the historical economic precedent is clear. A reduction in market competition inevitably results in a reduction of incentive to offer genuine, transparent value to the consumer.
Right.
The cycle of margin engineering and price expansion is highly likely to repeat itself once the consolidation is complete. So we leave you with a final, lingering thought to consider the next time you find yourself exhausted on the drive home, debating whether to pull into the drive-through lane. As the financial gap between the cost of purchasing raw groceries and the cost of buying a fast food meal continues to widen, and as the digital hoops you have to jump through simply to secure a basic discount continue to multiply, will everyday Americans simply be forced to relearn the habit of cooking at home?
It's a real possibility.
And if the fast food industry permanently abandons its core cultural identity as the provider of the affordable American meal, what exactly is its purpose in our society moving forward? Does it simply become a luxury tax on the working class for being too exhausted to cook?
That's a profound question.
That $10 bill we discussed at the very beginning of this deep dive, it hasn't lost all of its utility. But you might be significantly better off taking it to the grocery store.
It is undeniably the dawn of a highly complex, significantly more expensive era for the American diner.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious.